There's all these terms that are used to kind of class this group, this community. There's American Sikhs, there's white Sikhs, there's 3HO Sikhs. Do you subscribe to any of them? And if so, which ones? Or just what are your thoughts on all these phrases? Because they're kind of thrown around and interchangeably.
Yeah, I think that's been kind of a hard one, and I think people oftentimes are, they want to know, what should I call you? I mean, like, I'm a Sikh. I mean, pretty much that's it. But then sometimes when you get into it, it's like when you want to talk about your kind of Sikh, because realistically there are differences between Sikhs from different places, whether it's Sikhs in India, Sikhs in UK, and there's all the different flavors that are within each place. Ultimately, I feel like by using terms like that, it's further dividing us into categories, and it's already we look at all the differences and try to like pick at each other and find faults, and by looking at somebody based on their race or some of their differences, it then creates more stereotypes which are not accurate and just create more misinformation or things that's not factually correct. It's like if you have somebody who's a drunk Punjabi, that doesn't mean all Punjabis are drunk, or somebody who's mean to you doesn't mean all of them are mean. Like when I was in, one time I had to go for a traffic violation, and the judge, when I came up for my turn, the judge says, "You Sikhs all have lead feet," for going too fast. And so that was like her own stereotype, and there's plenty of stereotypes which are for all everybody, and I try to like avoid those kind of things just because it's not positive most of the time. If it's something that's for a positive reason, for trying to describe a group of people for some reason, then I don't know. I don't really have there's no PC proper term, because they're not white, they're not just from America. I mean, within the community that I grew up in, there's people from Mexico, from South America, from now China, from various parts of Asia that are not from India, Punjabi origin, that were not Sikhs or their parents aren't Sikhs. So there is no factually correct term, white Sikh, 3HO Sikh, none of that's really.
Just tell us the journey of you as a person, as a Sikh.
Yeah, I think probably my story is pretty intertwined with the community that I grew up in. In the late 1960s, Yogi Harbhajan came to the U.S. He actually first came through Canada and then came down to the U.S. And at that time, there were many of the young generation revolting against the way that society was. It was the 60s, many people, there was hippies, people like free love, it was the Beatles time, it was like a whole different kind of revolution of thinking, and during that time a lot of people were getting into Eastern philosophy, and during that time Yogi Harbhajan came to the US and saw many of the people doing drugs and kind of doing things that weren't really supportive to their selves. And so he kind of saw some of the need and started teaching meditation and yoga and talking to them about spirituality, about this not being, what they were doing wasn't going to be, helpful to them, and giving them techniques. And at that time, a lot of them started asking, well, what is this? What's this turban? What's this beard? What is that about? And so my parents' generation were, from that they started practicing yoga and meditation, and they learned about Guru Nanak, and they learned about the Sikhs and the Sikh Gurus, and for many of those people, this became their way of life. And I was born into that, and it was a very small community in Los Angeles. Most people, Sikhi was so new, and like you're used to it in the Sikh community, everything, you've gone to Gurdwara your whole life, you've seen all the stuff, and your parents know all the different things, but there, in those days, everything was new, like just making prasad, or how to take care of the Guru, or I remember the first time there was the first Amrit Sanchar in the Gurdwara there, that was like a big deal. Like knowing how to do that, and like everything was fresh, and doing Ardas in English, and all the, before Sikhi to the Max and projected thing, like we would do Shabad sheets, so the sheets were made with English translation, and that was how we're able to have an involvement in the Gurdwaras and understand it, and so there was a lot more English as part of it. So that was kind of how I started out in that space, and I think India was a very kind of mystical, faraway place. It was something that we'd heard. I grew up listening to stories of the gurus, Bidhi Chand and the gurus' horses, and all these Prahlad and Haran Kash. There's like, in the 70s, these are stories that I listened to and you're hearing all this music in the background. It was like this exciting place, and so I think probably going to India was a pretty exciting thing, and I went to boarding school when I was about 8 years old with a group of about 50 other kids from mostly America, and that was very difficult thing, I think, for all of our parents to send your kids halfway around the world in this different time where we weren't so connected, and it was a really far place. Many of us have watched Harry Potter, and it's this fantastical adventure, and we kind of joke about things, me and our friends, like we had way more adventures, way wilder, crazy adventures during those times in India, and the stories that we tell, back when we came back, it was like all of us kids who went to India, we had this bond that was so tight because all of the experience and the hardships and all the things that we went through was like so unique. One thing was apparent was it was very different than being in the US. In the US, we were kind of like, we were used to being able to speak your mind, express yourself. If you didn't like something, you said it. And in India, it wasn't like that. It was very like, do what you're told, or you would get a slap or get beaten. And it was more extreme, like, so anything, whether it's school stuff or just day-to-day things, there was a lot more strong, very strict. And so that was kind of interesting, because when I got older and I was a teenager and I was still in school there in India, and I was at that phase, I was going through a different phase of questioning, like looking at my identity as a Sikh, starting to be interested in girls and what those feelings, and a lot of my friends were experimenting with different drugs and alcohol and smoking, and so all these things are kind of swirling around, and I was learning about meditation and yoga, and I was I was reading all these different self-help books. Tony Robbins' Unlimited Power came out, and I was talking about the mind and how things get triggered, and all these different interesting things that was like sparked my imagination of how we think and what motivates us, and I was starting to think about like how we can use this in a positive way to support the youth, that people like me who were going through these changes in our lives, and be able to provide something that would be of value and support, because I didn't feel like the environment I was in really gave that support, and it was just very rigid, and just there wasn't like, when you ask a question, it wasn't like, hey, here's the reason. It was just do it because. And so like when you're talking about being a Sikh and looking a certain way, for me it was like, well, what's the science? Why do I have a beard? And looking at the hair and why I do things. I needed it to have a meaning for me, and so it was kind of interesting going through that. And during that period is when I got some friends together. I'm like, well, let's make a book that we can create to put all these different things. It wasn't a Sikh thing at all. It was just like all these quotes, inspiring quotes, different information about different things to kind of be a general resource. And that's kind of was the startings of it. And I was just going through, as I was scanning, and I was looking at all my notes of all the different things that I have and that I was for this book that I was going to be writing, and we were transcribing stuff, and we were all excited. It was the early days of the computers, and when I got to the US, that's when I started finding out some new computer systems. They were called bulletin boards, and you could talk with people remotely, and it was like, oh wow, this is cool. And then shortly after that, this visual browser Mozilla came out, and that was something, because before that the internet was all text-based and it wasn't as exciting. So it was when the visual browser came out, that's when really is like the start of the real internet that we know of. And that's when I created my first page, my first web page, and I had a lot of those materials that I put together. And I started like a streaming. This was back then, started Real Audio streaming, this company Real Audio, but this was in the early days, and I created my own radio station. I don't know. It was way early days. There's very few people. Back then it was like, let's search Sikh and see if something comes up. There was nothing, it was like so early days. And so that was kind of, for me, it was just a matter of like enthusiasm of doing something creative and wanting to connect people. I'm not a scholar. I'm not really, I would probably categorize as somebody who's more relates to experience and understanding things more so than trying to study or intellectualize things, because I don't do that very well. So when we talk about enjoying something or looking something, I want to feel it and experience it for myself and have the value for it. So that was really the startings of SikhNet, of just creating that page. I created directories and live chats, and there was like a Gurdwara directory, a Sikh like people directory, so you could find people. There was a discussion forums and chats. There would be the SikhNet chat lobby, which was really popular at the time. You'd go in and there'd be somebody there. So it was like a place where you could meet new people. Like nowadays, even with Facebook and social media, it's kind of like, how do you meet somebody? It's like you're just overloaded with all these people, but there's not like it's very different. And those were like the innocent days, and it was very different. Even for my wedding, some of the friends from the chat lobby that I had never met, it was like Kuldeep Singh from SikhNet chat lobby. That was what it was called, the SikhNet chat lobby, and some of the guys that I met in the chat, came to the wedding, and we'd never met before, and and then we were like, it's like we'd known each other for so long. And so it's super sweet just seeing how things have changed since that kind of essence. And I didn't want to duplicate what other people were doing, because my goal was really about connecting people and creating resources and things that help people in different ways. I think probably looking back at SikhNet, we've done so many different things, and the thing that I loved about, I say loved because it's different now than then, was when you're young and especially you're not married and you have flexibility. Like back then I was like working at night after work, and just whenever, all the time, you just had this passion, this drive. It's exciting, it's fun, this new kind of frontier, and it was so thrilling to, like, you have an idea, and then it was just like, hey, I'm gonna just do it. I'll make this, and then you have another idea, and like, I'm gonna make that, and keep So it was like running, because for me, I'm a creative person, and I thrive off of those creative ideas. And so, one of the early services that, we started in the early days, SikhMatrimonials.com. So that was something back then. There was nothing like that. There was a Match.com, which was the only kind of service like that. But I invented the new model of it, which was, because back then they were all pay to even enter in, and so I created, I'm like, hey, let's make this free to everybody, but then you have to pay to contact somebody. And so that was like, I wasn't sure if this would be accepted in terms of a matrimonial service for Sikhs, if people would like that, but it took off. A lot of people loved it, and I still, to this day, I meet people who come up to me and say, hey, we met on Sikh Matrimonials. So it's super cute. So that's one of the services that's not super active now, but in that day, that's what supported SikhNet for many years. And I think some of the other services, thinking back, that I feel like had a lot of value was MrSikhNet.com, and this was like my personal blog. I think I felt a little awkward, like trying to share like more personal things on the main Sikh website, because I wanted SikhNet to feel like it was not like just a Western born Sikh thing or a yoga thing, or I wanted people to feel like this was for everybody, and it's not just like a certain kind of Sikh thing. And so the personal blog was great because I felt like I could share my life journey in a way that was personal to me. And the thing that I think people appreciated was that, too often people write about stuff in life as if like talking down, like the environment is going wrong. You need to do this. And what I would do, instead of kind of addressing issues about things that were going on, I would share what's going on in my life and my process. So it was more sharing what I learned through my own experience in a very personal and real way, so that it wasn't preachy, and I think people really appreciated that. So little things like, my son was pretty young, and I go into his room and he's there with scissors, and he had just cut a bunch of his hair off, and it was just like, what do we, like a Sikhs, like that's like the big no, like, oh my God. And he'd cut a bunch of his hair off, and it was like, so I blogged about like little things like how, what was my thought process and how I was dealing with this, because too often we put a certain face forward of like, oh, we're this perfect thing and we don't have any issues, and but these are like, there's so many of these common things in everybody's life that are very real, that people don't hear about because they feel like others are going to judge them or criticize them or tell them that, some stigma or something. So this is the part, was like being open and real and honest. And I think that's something that I feel like has helped SikhNet grow, and just that we don't have an agenda. This is just us being real and trying to help other people be real and with themselves, and open up so that they can go through some of the challenges and things that they are. I mean, the film festival, that was an awesome service, and that was another idea that I always was excited about, of having a way to get more youth in other fields of media, because like I was getting into video, starting to record interviews with people about why they became a Sikh, and videos about spirituality, and I was like, not many young people at that time were doing anything like that. It was like doctor, lawyer, business person, and so I think that was one of the things, is like we needed to have our own voice as the youth, because otherwise it's just our parents' generation, and you hear other youth like that feeling of we don't have a voice, we don't have power, they control everything. And so the idea of the film festival is to give the youth a voice, and by us being engaged in media, I think it promoted this field and ways that other younger people can get into that. And it was inspiring seeing over the years a number of different young people, including hearing your own story about how that impacted you, and seeing youth all over who went into media, and not that the goal was for people necessarily become a career in that way, but at the very least to share those voices and thoughts in that space. So that was, I think, another impactful service, I think. Yeah, there's, I mean, it's 23 years, so it's kind of a long span of so many different things that we've worked on over the years, whether it's SikhWiki, it's an encyclopedia we've done, with some other friends, we've done this like turbanizer. It was like how to see what you look like in a turban, and you could put different turbans on, and that was a project with a friend that we did together. We did, like, the videos were really, I think, really exciting. Probably one of the more impactful things that I've worked on, that I think, talking about spirituality. A lot of them I started with Guruka, and his unique way of explaining things was many people really appreciated because it was very different. How do you get through, like, you have a problem with your relationship with your wife or husband, or raising your kids. I mean, a lot of these lifestyle issues, day-to-day things, are really the core. And as Sikhs, we're our householders. Our you could say the highest discipline is that of the householder. And I think that for me personally, being married and having kids is probably the biggest spiritual practice I think anybody could have, because it forces you to work on yourself, and it forces you to grow in many different ways, and it's challenging, and it's not easy, and it's beautiful at the same time too. So it's just all of it together. So I think that it's just a different way of looking at it, and trying to be real, because it's all about not trying to have this fantasy of what life is supposed to be like, oh, you're in love and everything's lovey-dovey, everything's gonna be perfect, and then you get married, and it's like after the honeymoon's over, and you put down your perfect face, and then we all have issues, and we all have opinions and differences, and it's like, how do you work through that? How do you grow? How do you like in my marriage and my relationship, there's a lot of compromises and things. Like, some things important to my wife, and some things are important to me, and it's easy to get into your emotions and be dramatic with each other and be like, like trying to dig in your heels, and I'm right and you're wrong, and where does that get you? So many divorces all the time, so many people in relationships that don't work out. And so I'm not trying to say this is all about relationships, but everything, I would say, I feel like relationships and how we deal in the day-to-day life are probably the biggest thing that all of us deal with, whether it's in the workplace or your family, your parents, or so those are really core things. And how do we use the message of the gurus to support us in that? And how do we get support from each other? And it doesn't have to even be a spiritual thing, so like, how do you help each other through those challenges? And I think SikhNet, we've tried to be that, like, social, spiritual, religious meeting place for all people, that you can come, learn something new, get inspiration, and take that home with you and share it with other people and apply it to your day-to-day life. So in the Sikh community, or probably any community, it's like, when you don't know much about other people, that's where it's easy to be judgmental and critical. And we see that in the world today. Like, in the US, people are like, Osama, when they see a Sikh with a turban, or they don't know what you are and what you're about. In the same way, people like me and my parents, when we came about, a lot of people didn't know what to make of us. Who are they? Are they some like cult or some other, do they follow some other Baba? Because like Yogi Harbhajan, he was a spiritual teacher. Though we all held him in very high regard, the Siddhi Guru Granth Sahib was our guru. He was not our guru. But many people misconstrued that as we worshipped him. And so there was a bit of misunderstanding, I think, in that. And I also feel that there was another area in relation to yoga and meditation. Many people, most Sikhs really don't know what yoga is. Like in their mind, they think of like these, Hindu swamis who are out in the streets with their bowls or they're ascetics that's going away from society. It's a whole different type of thing. Whereas for us, this was like the yoga of the householder. It was a way of staying healthy, about being stress-free and relaxed and tuned in and cleaning up your body so that you're ready to open up to the Nam, and when you're meditating, you're there and present. So I think some of it really just starts from really two communities not knowing each other and not understanding each other. And the same could be with, elders in my community. It was such a big gap between, culturally, between my parents' generation. So my generation, it's very different because many of our generation have grown up in Western countries, understanding both Eastern and Western culture. So it's not quite the same, but that certainly still exists today. Many people don't know who we are and still have these stereotypes of who we are and what we're about. The only thing, whether it's about the Sikh community relating to the greater public, or whether it's the Sikh community, Punjabis, Westerners, whatever kind of mix of things, it's really about coming together and getting to know each other. And I think everything comes when you have a conversation and you talk to somebody and you get to know who they are and where they come from and learn what they're about and what their beliefs are. In the same way, if there was a Christian or a Jew or somebody from another faith, they might have some radically different views. But like, how do you, at some point, you're trying to find out where is the common point, where do we align, and you go from that strength of what you have in common. And that's, I think, really the core of what is just knowing that there is no pantik ekta, like everybody's going to be one way. It's unrealistic. There's never going to be like a one way. You look at the Sikh community, people practice so many different things, so many different ways, whether it's how you chant Waheguru or how you do, you practice your banis or Simran or whatever maryadas that different people practice. So it's unrealistic to assume that everybody's going to do exactly the same thing. So at some point, we all each have to come to a point in our life where we say, all right, I recognize that you might not believe or follow everything exactly like me, and that's okay. We're all unique and we're all different. And then find out and then finding the commonality and getting to know each other, because it's when we see people from afar, and we kind of see as more objects in the distance that they're not a real person, that's when it becomes problematic. We don't relate to most of the greater Sikh community that were not from Punjab. They don't have this historical, you could say history, you could call it baggage, you could call it, it's like if you have a relationship with somebody and you have a fight and it's something that you've been dealing with a long time, it affects your relationship ongoing. You're always going to be thinking from that frame of reference. And so when people look at us, they're looking through their window of their life and what has happened. And when they see us, it's through that lens. And when we see and hear about things, we don't have those filters to see things in the way that they do. So it's very different. From what I remember of that time, I went to India in 1983. And so I remember going there, Amritsar, in those early days, and that was probably my second time being there. I was there when I was 5 years old in 1979, and then went with that school in Amritsar. So I remember being in Masudi in our school and hearing about the assassination, hearing about the riots, and hearing about all this stuff going on. I was just a young kid, and I remember they put up security, all around the school. We were far away from Punjab, so we weren't even in Punjab, but in the Dehradun, in the local, down the mountain, there was riots and other things that went on. So it did go out, and we were aware of it, and it was something that we were afraid. And, I can't imagine what my parents must have thought about it. But back then, media wasn't like now, where you find things instantaneous. So it was like, I think they probably had no clue what was going on. And I remember going to Delhi one time, and we went to this restaurant. It was like some new like burger restaurant. It was kind of trying to be more westernized. This was before, it was super westernized there. And then I remember seeing, over the table over, there was these other kids, and they're all like dressed with all their like American clothes and trying to talk a certain way and be all hip. And it was interesting. I was there wearing bana and this white guy trying to be like, you could say, an Indian or a Sikh. And these other people trying to be like an American. And it was like, what's going on here? And it was this interesting kind of, it was interesting just seeing that. And then as I kind of, you go deeper and you think about it, most people in India, you're raised that career is like the number one thing that you need to deal with. You need to be a really high paying job, a doctor, a lawyer, or some kind of business person. And then no arts or any of those like frowned upon. It's got to be like high paying job. And that's like the number one thing. Spirituality, religion, that things are like way down on the list. I was raised very differently. Like I feel like spirituality in your day-to-day discipline was the core focus of our everyday life, whether it's from what you eat and how you take care of your body, how you talk to people, what your actions are and what you do, what your practice is during the day. And all those things were such a big part of what we learned growing up. And so when I think of myself as a Sikh, it's really my whole life has revolved around developing myself spiritually, working on, let's say, not like to become some super spiritual kind of in some airy-fairy way, but just basically with the goal of becoming a better person and you could say doing the hard work of trying to work on myself and improve myself. So I've been married 20 years now. I just celebrated my 20th anniversary in January, and I have a 17-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter. So, I've certainly had I'm not an expert. I think every parent will have different perspectives that they can share. But I would say for my family, because spirituality and our daily practices is a very core part of our day-to-day life, that it definitely has a different filter on our everything that we do. Because when you think about parenting and relationships, a lot of it's about communication. How do you talk to people? How do you talk to each other? How do you listen? How do you when you have some problem, how do you voice it in a way that the other person can be receptive? And how do you listen to the other person and acknowledge them so that they know that you hear them? Because more often than not, in relationships, you're just trying to prove your point to the other person of that you're right and they're wrong. And you end up spiraling out and just getting things get worse. So it's like a lot of it is just about how to have effective communication with each other. And there's techniques and different things that you can do for that. And I think in terms of kids, so kids as adults, we feel like, all right, we're the parents and you're the kid, and we talk down at them and we order them around and we tell them what to do. And at a certain point, like these kids are their own beings, and we want to give them the tools to be able to handle whatever things come their way. And if you try to control everything that they're doing, then they don't learn how to handle certain things and have the independence to then be able to speak up about certain things and express what's going on, like something that you said they didn't want to do, and how do they feel comfortable enough sharing that. So I think like when we talk to our kids, a lot of it is like, how do you talk to each other, and how do you listen to each other? And little things like my son hates to be, when you're like, okay, Narayan, you need to take out the trash, you need to do this. Oh, why didn't you do that? You already did, you're supposed to do that. Instead, we write it down on a list and like we leave it on the table. Like he doesn't like to be told what to do, but if there's a list, the things, then he can kind of process it on his own and deal with it and mark it off. We see it's marked off, it's done. And there's different techniques for, this isn't by any means like a spiritual kind of type of thing, but a lot of it's just like having harmony in the household where you're getting along. And when it comes to certain things, like my daughter, sometimes she gets emotional about different things, like what kid doesn't, they cry about different things. And, I try to train her and talk to her like, okay, when she gets emotional, I say like, all right, what are your tools? And some of her tools are like, okay, stop, take some deep breaths, like inhale, exhale, because when our emotions are our thing, we react and we get out of control and we say things that we don't want to say. Adults too. So adults can use these too. So taking a break, if you need, I need a little space to think about it, or drink some water and take some deep breaths. Like simple little things like that are things that kind of help de-escalate certain situations with kids. Want to take care of them. We want the best for them, but oftentimes what we as parents do, you could say in some levels you might call it spoiling them. We want to do everything for them to help them, but at the same time, like one of the reasons like we have chores or different things that you're involved in the household, and that's teaching them that they're part of the household, that we're not just giving them everything. Because if they don't learn the value of hard work, that they're involved, that they have to put work into doing it. This is the Amazon.com age. When my son would come home from India and we'd order something, Amazon Prime, and it's like instant, it comes there like right away. And it's like this instant gratification, like, oh, we just order it and next day a nice pair of shoes is there. And when they start getting used to this instant getting stuff and not really having a sense of value for what it takes to do that and the work, that's gone in to earn that money. So I think that's really important for as parents to really imbibe that sense of hard work and the value. And that's like a core Sikh value of hard work, earning your living honestly and sharing. And, like my daughter, we homeschooled her this year, and one of her projects was, we've had for a long time, we've trained her, like we have 3 jars. One is the giving jar, one is the saving jar, and one is the spending jar. So whenever she gets her allowance or she gets money from her birthday or from other things, she takes up the money and divides it up into those jars. And then that was the base that we started when she was very young. And at that point, money doesn't mean much. She doesn't spend it. It wasn't a big deal. And now she's getting older, and like she's a little more entrepreneur. She loves baking cupcakes, and she started a little cupcake business, and she's 12 years old. So, she makes these really beautiful, fancy cupcakes, and she was selling them. And it's the same thing, that she's learning about how do I earn work and earn money, and the value of what you get from the money, and then putting it in those different jars. And she takes every periodic when she has it, she decides, okay, I'm going to give some of this to the animal shelter. I'm going to give this. We have another program that's food for kids. There's, people in our community young kids that don't have food on the weekend. So it's things that she relates to and she connects to. So it gives her a little more personal meaning rather than, some concept that we talk about. So it's like, how do you bring things in a way that are related, that the kids can understand and have value to them? And that hard work, like my son, we didn't want to give, he wanted all kinds of, he's like, my friends get all this, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, that's great that they get all that, but that's not our way. Like, we don't have unlimited money, and we have, you got to work for it. If you want this, you got to earn it. There's no free ride. And so those are the kind of values. And so they're not really religious, but to me, the core of what us as Sikhs and family members is about giving them good values of, working hard, honestly sharing, and really just being good person in society so that you're contributing and not just hoarding it and just trying to show off and like being like, I got this, or the entitled kid who their parents gave them everything and then they're spoiled, and then they hate the world, they hate their parents because they don't know how to deal with people and they feel entitled. Like when something doesn't go their way, you're actually as a parent doing a disservice to them because you're not giving them the tools and the training to then have the foundation so that they can be on their own. I noticed that in the Sikh community, and it's not necessarily just the Sikh community, but particularly because I've grown up being different, that I've experienced a lot of criticism, judgment, hate, otherness. And I know Sikhs are no stranger to that. I know many Sikhs in the US and other people feel that from the greater Sikh community. What they may not realize is that people like myself who have grown up in this path as well, who are Sikhs and many who are new to Sikhi, I think oftentimes feel like outcasted or not accepted. And not to say it's like a blame thing that somebody else has to accept them, but when you look at the core kind of the core part of Sikhi, when you look at Guru Nanak, who in his travels there would be a murderer or some thief or somebody that was like not small things, that he would look inside them and see the God in them and see their higher good self in every single person, and he would uplift them. He wouldn't be there like, you're the terrible person, go to hell, get out of my sight. He didn't do that. He saw beyond whatever challenges that we were in life and saw the God in each of us. You can talk, Guru Nanak talks about all it, like you can think and talk or argue with the fools. You never get anywhere. It's pointless. And many times people are already set in their way of thinking, and they're not ready to, they don't care about actually having a common understanding. They just want to prove they're right and they know something, and it's a sense of like power for them to say like, you've done this wrong, and that's a level that I've seen in our community. It's like this kind of radical, maybe it's like this, people feel a sense of purpose, like they're doing something good, protecting Sikhi by putting others down. And you see examples, like I remember there was a blog called Sikh Problems Blog, and this was something that all they posted was pointing out all these different things that different people had done wrong in the community. This such and such person did this bad thing, we need to stop them. And I'm like, why don't you create a Sikh Solutions blog? And why don't you create something that is really focused on how do you uplift people? How do you support people? How do you help people on this journey? So those are the kinds of things that I'm interested in, because I know from my own personal experience, when I was a teenager and I was out clubbing and I was doing, things that were against the SikhNet Maryada and kind of going away from Sikhi, if people tossed me out and pushed me out, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be who I am today. And so it gives me a different understanding that we all have our lows, and the lows, being in the mud, being in the dirt, that's oftentimes where we rebound and crystallize, because it's through that pain that we wake up. And nobody wants to be in pain. If everything's great and fine, you just carry about your life. So it's through the darkness, through the pain that many people wake up. So being understanding and knowing that people are going through their life and they're on their own journey, and at whatever stage they're at, and you don't know what their thing is that they need to wake up. And you can be there to support them, but don't brag, don't pull people down into the mud, don't drag people, don't. So I'm really about a message of unity, about supporting each other, and being aware of your own mind when you're thinking things and catching yourself, because I still have critical thoughts. It's not, I still have an ego. We're human, but I trained myself to be aware of it and catch it and shut it off. It's like the monkey mind is going. It's like, I see that thought going, I'm like, no, shut up, but that takes practice. And I think the more we're aware of our thoughts and the things that we're saying and doing and how they hurt and impact other people, the more I think that we can change. Because it's not like, we feel so distant sometimes when you're judging people or doing things from afar. But we're all human. We're all real people. We have feelings. We all have challenges in our own different hardships. And I think when we get to know each other personally, it can change the whole dynamic, especially if you actually care to make things better. And I think oftentimes people are so caught up in their own things that they don't actually care to resolve things. They just want to put you aside and tell you how bad you're doing wrong. And that's the problem. But I think with enough awareness and on this, I think we can make change in that. And that's kind of one of the things that I like to promote, and I hope that others think about that. The way when I relate to technology, I think it's really a really important tool that allows us to connect and do things that we could never do before. Like when you think about the Sidhu Granth Sahib and Gurbani, like look at the Gurbani Media Center. In the palm of your hands, we have like 10 years, you could listen for 10 years and never hear the same Shabad again. Like it's like this massive amount from Kirtan from the early 70s till now, thousands and thousands of recording, all this knowledge, all this amazing inspiration can be there at the palm of your hands. But the reality is, it's not like a donkey with a bunch of Bibles on its back doesn't make it a priest. It's like having knowledge at your fingertips and information doesn't mean that you actually can practice it and do it. So it's a resource and it's a tool. And I think we kind of have to separate, you still have to practice and you have to go through certain things to actually, benefit from it. And I think we're only starting to see what you can do with this. And in terms of Sikhi, I think, having Gurbani in this textual form that you can then easily access. In the old days, how would you read from the Guru? Even now, even in this day, most people don't have a Guru in their home. It's not a small responsibility, and it's not a small thing. Now, through our technology, we can have digital versions of our copies. We all know we can understand the words of the Gurus better. We can communicate with each other like we're in this videos. I mean, this is technology of how we're sharing thought and ideas, and it's like creates a whole new way of learning. And I think that was one of the super exciting things for me with SikhNet. I was like seeing all these different people, like this $1 million Gurdwara, that all these, I'm like, for just, $20 when I was small, like this little hosting thing and just my creative ideas, I would have the impact to reach thousands and thousands of people to impact some positive change. And that's amazing to be able to do that. And that's what technology gives you. It gives you a platform, gives you tools for understanding and reaching out and connecting.